Now, German Chancellor Angela Merkel and regional leaders, I'm talking about the EU regional leaders, are meeting to evaluate whether or not the lockdown easing measures introduced there a couple of weeks ago have borne any fruit. Additionally, more easing measures began this week there, including the reopening of, hairdressing saloons, churches, museums, galleries, and memorials. So we're discussing today with Thomas Sparrow what really has come out from this review meeting. Also, it is a very historical moment in Germany because Friday marks the 75th anniversary of the end of the Second World War. So very big things are happening there. But how will that happen in the midst of coronavirus? That's why Thomas Sparrow, political correspondent with our partners, DW, is joining me from home in Berlin. Thomas, it's good to have you as always. So let's begin with what has come of this review meeting that we're all looking forward to.
So this meeting finished a few minutes ago here in Berlin. In fact, Angela Merkel and two of the regional leaders gave a very lengthy press conference in Berlin where they stressed that they did bear fruit, the measures that were taken, that in fact Germany had now managed to not overwhelm the country's health system, for example, that the first stage of the epidemic was now over, although leaders stressed that it was a sort of careful success because Germany still has challenges ahead. And as such, because the numbers have kept falling, because the numbers have been seen as positive, Germany has now announced the next stage of its easing of restrictions, and that includes the reopening of all shops. So you may remember, Gifty, that previously we had discussed that only certain shops were allowed to open, shops of under 800 square meters. Well, now all shops are allowed to open as long, obviously, as they keep their hygiene and social distancing measures. And something else that has been announced is that sport will be resumed, for example, just amateur sports, obviously again keeping appropriate measures, and the German football league, the Bundesliga, will be able to resume without spectators. But this is particularly important because this is the first big European league to announce that. Some of the other European leagues have either abandoned the league completely now or have not announced yet what the decision will be. In Germany's case, the government and the regional governments have given the green light for the Bundesliga to restart. That is particularly important from a social perspective, also from an economic perspective, but it's also been a controversial decision here in the country.
And that's very key because, look, how are they going to play? Will they have masks on? I mean, how will they be sure that someone doesn't get so close to one another on the pitch, even if there are no people, no spectators? That's a very difficult one, I believe. What sort of discussion has come up in the wake of this decision? Are people rejecting it, or are people just really tired of being indoors and want life to come back to a semblance of normalcy?
Gifty, something very important about all the measures that we've been discussing. So not only the decision on German football, or the decision, for example, on shops reopening or churches being open again, or the decision, for example, that is now in the hands of regional governments when to reopen hotels or restaurants. In every single one of these discussions and in every single one of these decisions, obviously very important measures have to be taken for the social distancing practices and hygiene measures to be kept in place. So it's obviously to the respective entities to decide how exactly that will be maintained. I don't think footballers will end up having to wear masks, but it is possible that obviously footballers will have to have testing and that they will have to keep particular measures put in place. And the same applies to restaurants, hotels, shops. Another important element discussed today, Gift, is that the goal is for every pupil in the country to be able to return to school before the summer holiday. An important goal, but again a big challenge for schools as they have to prepare for pupils going back to lessons and going back to schools and have new measures put in place. When you ask how people are responding to this, it's obviously still too early to see how people are responding to the very latest measures. They were only announced a few minutes ago. But you can say that before that there was a sense of impatience among many Germans. There was a sense that numbers had been falling, numbers had been dropping, and as such many had expected those further easing of restrictions. This is something very important as well if you consider the economic outlook for Germany, not only the overall economic outlook, but also the economic outlook for many people in this country that were concerned about the lengthiness of all this and how this could affect their personal economy. And in particular, if we think about the general economy in the country, let's not forget that the German economy minister said a few days ago that Germany would face the biggest economic recession in decades. And as such, it was important for Germany step by step to reopen, to ease some of those restrictions and get back to some sort of normality, even though it's absolutely clear that there will not be a comprehensive overall sense of normality for some time to come yet.
So you indicated that they're looking forward to students going back to school before summer holidays. But in terms of the resumption of the Bundesliga, for example, and churches and restaurants, is there a date to when this actually starts?
In particular, when it comes to the Bundesliga, it's now up to the Football Federation in Germany to decide exactly when that could happen. According to information that has been released, this could be obviously in the second part of the month, so in the second part of May. If we look about restaurants, that's up to the specific regions, and that has to do with the fact that specific regions in Germany are affected differently. So it's now up to, for example, the health authorities in the respective regions to determine when they could reopen certain restaurants or when they could reopen certain hotels. Some regions have already announced when that will happen. So, for example, Bavaria in the south of Germany has already announced when it will reopen some of its restaurants and beer gardens. Others have still to announce that, depending on how they see the situation in the respective country. All this points to an important element, and that is that here in Germany it is very difficult to have a central decision. Germany, as a federal country with a decentralized authority, obviously we're talking here about regional governments, have to coordinate between them. The regional governments have to coordinate with the central government, the federal government in Berlin. But it's up to the regional authorities in many cases. When we're talking about health, for example, when we're talking about education, when we're talking about sport, it's up to them to ultimately decide how the decisions will be implemented. At the same time, I would like to stress that for Angela Merkel, the Chancellor, it was particularly important to have some common thread. So basically, not every separate state deciding on its own in a situation of such urgency and of such importance as the coronavirus crisis. It was absolutely key for not only regions but also the federal government to coordinate.
And I hope that that coordination will go on. We'll be here to see how that works. But finally, Thomas, 75 years or 75th anniversary of the Second World War to be commemorated, obviously, on Friday. How is that commemoration going to be different from what we've known so far, given that we are in a pandemic?
Well, it would also be marked by the pandemic as such. Obviously, there were big things planned for this anniversary, not only here in Germany, but also in other parts of Europe. But that will not prevent German leaders from commemorating the day anyway. For example, German Chancellor Angela Merkel and the German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier will attend a ceremony here in Berlin on Friday. By the way, here in Berlin, Friday is a public holiday, exceptionally, so only this year, to mark the occasion. And as such, the German President, who's the head of state in the country, and the German Chancellor will attend this commemoration, obviously under strict hygiene and social distancing measures once again, because it's important for them to, in a way, lead by example. So there will be a ceremony, there will be a commemoration, but it will be different from what had been planned originally in pre-coronavirus times.
Thomas, thank you for that update. Very interesting updates there. So as you heard from Thomas Sparrow today, a few minutes ago, that meeting ended in Germany, where the regional leaders have decided on easing the restrictions. They've decided based on the fact that it is clear to them that the first stage of the outbreak has not overwhelmed the country's health system. And so they believe that is the right thing to do to move on. They're looking at opening up gradually, with restaurants opening, etc., including resumption of the Bundesliga. Interesting thoughts there. Thomas Sparrow with that from Germany.